today we have three papers. We know that. In Sanskrit we will say that Vade Vade Jayade Tattva Bodha. Then when we have, after the paper presentation, when we are doing the great deliberations, that will make our philosophy in the next extent. So the deliberations are very important. So I am requesting after the session of our lunch, so sometimes you will be tempted to sleep, don't sleep. And you have to listen very carefully. And three, I am inviting Kabida Dolai. And yeah, and the three paper presentations are here. I am inviting three members here, and Adrija, yes, come to on the dais, and Pandoibi. Three members I am inviting to the dais and stay here. Come. And our Kabida Doloi is presenting Pratiksha. We know that the testimony, the Indian epistemology, the Pratiksha is the first one, and we know that the Charvaka philosophy was accepted the Pratiksha as the most important. That is the only pramana like that. So it is very important, and I am inviting Kabida Doloi to present their opinions. Admissions.
The title of my paper is, as ma'am has already mentioned, that the Pratyaksha, the primary pramana in Indian logic. So my paper will concentrate on basically Nyaya philosophy. So generally the concept of pramana occupies a very important or greatest important in Indian philosophy, not only in Nyaya philosophy. So generally the word pramana, by the word pramana we mean the sources of valid knowledge. So by the word pramana, before we going to discuss about the sources, then we have to know about the concept of valid knowledge. What is valid knowledge? So pramana is the source or the medium through which we can have valid knowledge or right knowledge. So right knowledge means when we, according to Nyaya philosophy, when we perceive an object as it is, along with its real characters, then it is valid. And Nyaya philosophy accepts four kinds of pramanas: perception or pratyaksha, anumana or inference, upamana or comparison, and sabda or testimony. So among these pramanas, perception or pratyaksha is considered as the primary pramana because pratyaksha means the direct knowledge. It is the knowledge, that direct knowledge that we can gain from the direct contact with the objects. So when the self have the direct knowledge or direct contact with the objects, then it is called pratyaksha or perception. And Nyaya philosophy has given two forms of knowledge. One is valid and invalid. So valid means pramana and invalid means those aprama. And invalid, the knowledge, it includes samshaya, doubt, error, and hypothetical argument. Then we come to the perception again. That perception is the direct knowledge when we have direct knowledge or direct contact with the external objects. And later on we will come to know that perception means not only the direct contact between the object and the sense organs, at the same time it will be the direct knowledge of the self also. So I'll read out some of the lines. There are some important points that Nyaya philosophy has mentioned about the primacy, why we call pratyaksha or perception as a primary sources in comparison to other sources of knowledge. So the first one is that according to Nyaya philosophy, pratyaksha is the ultimate ground of all knowledge. It is a fact that all knowledge doesn't come from perception or pratyaksha, but it is the primary or the foundation of all other knowledges or sources of knowledge. Suppose if we want to get the knowledge in case of or through inference or anumana, then we will definitely have to depend on perception. Again, if we will have to knowledge through sabda or testimony, then also we will have to base on perception. Secondly, Nyaya system again holds that pratyaksha is the final test of all knowledge. Question may arise regarding the truth of knowledge derived from Anumana, Sabda, Upamana, etc. But the truth of Pratyaksha is beyond question. An object may be known by means of Sabda, Anumana and Pratyaksha, but the knowledge from Sabda and Anumana required confirmation from Pratyaksha. The knowledge of the object by Pratyaksha does not need further confirmation. The perception verification is the final test of all other knowledge, and it is the most important of all the sources of human knowledge. Hence, Nyaya system holds that there is no doubt that Pratyaksha is the final test of all other knowledges. But again, it says that though it is the primary, the foundational source of valid knowledge, yet it cannot be considered as self-evident, because sometimes perception may also provide some knowledge which may not be considered as true. In that case, if this type of problem arises, then according to Nyaya philosophy, perception, though it is valid source of knowledge, it may be verified or testified whether it is true or false. So, I want to conclude that according to Nyaya philosophy, perception is the primary source of valid knowledge through which we can have direct knowledge. And I accept the view provided by Nyaya philosophy that though perception is the primary or foundational, which is the basis of all other sources of valid knowledge, yet if this type of problems arises or some difficulties arises in case of perception, then this should be also examined like the other sources of valid knowledge.
Thank you, Kabita. You will please be seated. Please be seated. Congratulations. And dear friends, I am inviting all of you.
As a pramana, Pratyaksha is not actually, in English you are saying that it is direct knowledge. Pratyaksha is not direct knowledge. It's a very fast sentence you said that. Pratyaksha is the contact of our, Indriyartha sarvikarsa utpannam jnanam jannam abhyavicari abhyavadashyam vyavasayatmaka pratyaksha. So a lot of things are there. We should not say this is direct knowledge. Translation. The translation is Indriyartha sarvikarsa in pratyaksha is a necessary relationship between our 5 sense organs with the object, and the relation between sense organ and the object are of 6. There are 6 sannikarsa, sada sannikarsa. Then abhyavicari, abhyavadasyam, vyavasayatmaka. It should be no vyavicari. I am perceiving a lion, but if I say that I am perceiving a cat, that is not the issue. Abhyavicari. And suppose I am perceiving the sun, I am talking about moon. Abhyavadasyam, uddeshyam, vyavasayatmaka. It should be, vyavasayatmaka means it should be a necessary or constant relationship. यहाँ देखा वहाँ देखा नहीं होगा, एक को देखो, constant, vyavasayatmaka protection. Lot of things are there. And in Gautama's Nyaya Sutra and the Nyaya Vasya by Gangesh Mahopadhyaya, it's something different. Pratyaksha's definition is different. I cannot say everybody is everything whatever I see is pratyaksha. I can see that is pratyaksha which is exactly coming into this definition. Then only pratyaksha is pratyaksha. And there is also a pratyaksha and pratyaksha jnana. There is a difference between the two. One is prama, another is pramana. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakshmikanta sir. And our young scholars will be very encouraged to give some remarks. Okay, then we may go to the next one.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Actually, critique is the heart of philosophy, not the art. Actually, that is the exact sense. So, I am inviting Adrija to present her paper because Foucault is nowadays, his importance is increasing nowadays, his philosophy. Okay.
To respected chairperson, all the learned dignitaries present here, fellow research scholars, and all others. Myself, Adrija Sharma from Guwahati University, take my stand before you to present my paper, Critique as Art of a Gordian Perspective. The philosophical inquiry into the nature of enlightenment has garnered miscellaneous responses from a number of comprehensive perspectives, which marks as a pivotal moment in the history of Western thought. Michel Foucault identifies Immanuel Kant's 1784 essay, What is Enlightenment, as an inimical response which stands as a substantial point of departure because of Kant's specific consideration of today and its significance to a specific moment in time. Foucault's attempt was mainly to comprehend how Kant raised the philosophical inquiry of contemporary reality. Before delving into the paper, I would like to clarify that this paper seeks to analyze Foucault's reading of Kant and Baudelaire and how he used Baudelaire to frame his own view on this notion of enlightenment, which eventually came to be considered as the Enlightenment. First, Foucault observes Kant posed the question of enlightenment in an atypical manner. He places his age neither within a divine plan nor in any rational plan of history. Rather, Kant explains enlightenment in an almost entirely negative way, as an exit, a way out. For Kant, enlightenment is basically a process that frees us from the state of immaturity, which refers specifically to a state of our will that makes us accept someone else's authority to lead us in areas where the use of reason is called for. This is what Kant meant by immaturity according to Foucault. Kant, however, on the one hand, characterizes enlightenment as an ongoing process, and on the other, he also familiarizes it as a task, as an obligation. Since the initial stages, Kant claims that humanity's failure to think for oneself is a self-imposed condition. From this, Foucault reasons that man will be able to break free from this condition only by a change that he himself will bring about in himself, through an instruction that one gives to oneself and proposes it to others, and this instruction was given by Kant himself, the instruction that dare to know, have the courage, the audacity to know. Thirdly, Foucault identifies another difficulty in Kant's text regarding the usage of the term mankind. The ambiguity is whether the entire human race is caught up in the process of enlightenment, or if it involves a change in in what constitutes the humanity of human beings. Kant's answer involves two crucial conditions, at once spiritual and institutional, ethical and political. First, there must be a clear separation between obedience and independent use of reason according to Kant, and second, he distinguishes between public and private uses of reason. Individuals, according to Kant, use reason privately when he has a role to play in society and jobs to do. In these roles, their reasoning is key to specific objectives and social structures. Conversely, Foucault writes, when people reason as a member of reasonable humanity and not as a cog in a machine, then their use of reason must be free and public. Foucault then acknowledges a fourth question which follows from the third difficulty. How can the public use of reason be guaranteed without leading to chaos? Kant puts forth the solution in the contract of rational despotism, suggesting that an unlimited public employment of reason in accordance with general principles shall in the end secure better submission to the ruling authority as long as authority rests upon reason. When evaluating these points, Foucault stresses the relevance of Kant's text on enlightenment lies in the link between his response to enlightenment and his three critiques. Kant's emphasis on reason led Foucault to ponder reason, if left unattended, might lead to dogmatism and blind submission to authority. Yet, through the clear definition of rightful territory of reason, its autonomy, its ability for self-governance can be assured, and this was opined by Foucault. Hence, for Foucault, this marks the beginning of an attitude of modernity. Foucault, however, envisions modernity not as a chronological period of history, but as an attitude, a mode of relating to contemporary reality, a voluntary choice of thinking, feeling, acting, behaving, something what the Greeks called as an ethos. Subsequently, instead of trying to draw hard lines between different historical periods, like modern versus pre-modern, he identifies the attitude of modernity as a struggle against attitudes of counter-modernity. Foucault turns to Charles Baudelaire, who was a French poet and an essayist, to characterize this ethos. Foucault claims that for Baudelaire, the spirit of being modern does not lie in a passive reception of this everlasting undertaking. On the contrary, it consists of a deliberate, difficult attitude that seeks to recapture something eternal that is not beyond the present instant, nor behind it, but within it. Foucault emphasizes that for Baudelaire, modernity is the will to heroize the present, that means to make the present as the hero. Drawing upon Baudelaire, Foucault nevertheless suggests that the now should not be treated as something to be protected or to be worshipped. Foucault here references the flaneur in this regard as revealed by Baudelaire himself. The flaneur was an idle, strolling spectator who was satisfied to keep his eyes open, to pay attention and build up a storehouse of memories. So basically the flaneur was something who received things very passively. There was no active interplay between him and whatever came through him. Contrariwise, the man of modernity is a solitary figure with an active imagination who uses their creativity to find deeper meaning in the fleeting trends of the day and who transfigures the world. This transfiguration is not an annulling of reality, but a difficult interplay between the truth of what is real and the exercise of freedom. Finally, Foucault observes that for Baudelaire, modernity is not restricted to relationship with the present. It is also a mode of relationship that has to be established with oneself, a form of indispensable asceticism called dandyism by Baudelaire. And the dandy is someone who makes his body, his behavior, his feelings and passions, his very existence a work of art. Therefore, Foucault opines, this modernity does not liberate man in his own being, it compels him to face the task of producing himself. Put simply, to be modern in the Baudelairean sense is to choose to be modern. Foucault's own project now seeks to extend this heroization of the present into the very fabric of the philosophical life. To define this ethos, Foucault first addresses the intellectual blackmail of the Enlightenment. He insists that the simplistic and the authoritarian alternative of being for or against the Enlightenment must be refused. Instead, people must analyze oneself as beings who are historically determined to a certain extent by the Enlightenment. For him, the thread of connecting us to the Enlightenment is actually a permanent reactivation of an attitude, that is, a philosophical ethos that could be described as a permanent critique of our historical era. Moreover, a crucial component of this permanent critique is the rigorous separation of humanism from the Enlightenment. Foucault clarifies that while the Enlightenment is a historical event, humanism is a theme, or rather a set of themes that he considers too supple, too diverse and too inconsistent to serve as an axis of reflection. In its place, he proposes the principle of a critique and a permanent creation of ourselves in our autonomy, a historical ontology of ourselves that is grounded in the actual practices of our lives. Moving to the positive facet of this ethos, Foucault characterizes it as a limit attitude, not as an attempt to step outside of history, but a practice to be at the frontiers. That transforms the necessary limitation into a practical critique that takes the form of a possible transgression. In this sense, critique as an art is the constant transfiguration of the self, a permanent reactivation of the courage to know and the courage to become otherwise. To conclude, the path of Foucault's rendezvous with the Enlightenment reveals a reflective reimagining of philosophy, moving away from the discovery of universal truths and toward a historical ontology of ourselves. By tracing this development through the rational obligations of Kant and the aesthetic transfigurations of Baudelaire, an artistic aspect of critique was put forth by Foucault. In this perspective, the art of critique is not an ornamental behavior but a practice of existence aimed at the production of autonomy. While Kant established a necessary contract for the public use of reason, he largely left the individual within the margins of a universal human nature. Baudelaire's modernity pushed this further by suggesting that the present and the self are not sheer things to be understood, but materials, but something to be heroized and developed. Foucault synthesizes these two positions by stripping away the rigid structures of the 18th century on the one hand and the elitism of the 19th century Delhi on the other, thereby presenting critique as an eternal recrudescence of a philosophical attitude. In other words, for Foucault, the enlightened aesthetics of the self includes both the rationalist dimension of Kant's thinking and the effective side of Baudelaire's aesthetic. Ultimately, Foucault's reading suggests that to be a child of enlightenment is not to be a faithful follower of its historical doctrines, but to be an agent in its critical spirit. This is because a critical ontology of ourselves reveals the constructedness of our beings, its contingency, its revocability, and thus its transformability. This historical ontology of ourselves does provide the methodological and ethical foundation for a critique that is in its essence an everlasting work of art performed upon the self. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very, very good presentation. And I am inviting for the philosophers for the discussion.
Welcome to Sharma. Let me ask you a question. As far as I understand, Foucault's understanding of enlightenment actually, what is not enlightenment? We get my question. You can make a difference between what is enlightenment and what is not enlightenment. If you read that long essay, maybe around I think 40 to 50 pages. Kant talks about the historical ontology of the human subject, maybe in 2-3 ways. But I think, Foucault rather try to understand maybe this issue, maybe in a different way. I would say, Kant is talking about what is enlightenment. Foucault rather tries to understand this question, what is not enlightenment. How will you react to that?
Sir, Foucault actually kind of tried to build his own notion of enlightenment upon Kant, because yes, as you said, Kant made his notion of enlightenment based upon the autonomy of the will,
yes,
based upon reason, and according to
postulates of morality.
Yes, and according to Foucault, there is nothing as universal reason. So he was trying to bring.
More than that, I think see, as far as Kant is concerned, human autonomy is the main concern. Whereas Foucault is not like that. Therefore, I am trying to state that Foucault's understanding about the essay by Kant is not about the normal level, positive level, but not the other. I mean, what is not enlightenment. This is what I am trying to point out. Yes.
Yes, sir, I guess we can put it in that way as well. But what I want to say is that Foucault we can assume that Foucault transcended Kant somewhere.
Yeah.
Foucault accepted Kant's will to autonomy, but then he somewhere extended his view beyond Kant. Because, yes, sir.
Human autonomy, yes.
Yes, because he ultimately, Foucault developed his view based upon the historicity of an individual. So, sir.
This is?
I'll have a quick, maybe a suggestion. You can consider it was a really nice talk. So I really do not have any questions on your essay. But, so for example, you're reading, or rather Foucault is reading Kant and Baudelaire as in the historical setting. So the notion of enlightenment as Kant understands is really rooted in the times that Kant is writing. Similarly, the notion of Lanier or the notion of dandy, what you find in the essays and writings of Baudelaire, they have to do with this decaying, decadent elitism, as you have rightly pointed out, of France and other these colonial states of that time. One can ask a similar question about Foucault, and that might be something to take forward. You are taking a writer from 18th century, one from 19th century, Foucault being a 20th century scholar, and ask whether this notion of critique that Foucault talks about. There's a very interesting essay, I forget by whom has critique run out of steam. And you should actually ask, or you could ask this question, whether this notion, this historicized notion of enlightenment that Foucault is talking about, how relevant it is, and what are the shortcomings of that particular notion in our age, in 21st century. So you take the project, in a sense, forward, rather than stopping at Foucault.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Can I? So in continuation with Mr. Sir has left and Abhishek, I congratulate Adina for the presentation. Actually, Foucault himself says that he should be criticized. That is the best part of Foucault, that he has criticized Kant, he has brought in the autonomy as important aspect, but Foucault talks about the creativity of the self through aesthetic. So the aesthetic is an ongoing creation process, and Foucault himself repeatedly says that his work ought to be criticized, and that is Foucaultian.
So what is this aesthetics and management of water? Can you just spell a little bit more?
So actually I used this term, this is a quotation from, I've used from a secondary source. But sir, the enlightened aesthetic, right sir? So basically, so because even Baudelaire, he did not limit him, he was focused only on the self, like what the self must do, and not on any, he did not based on any human nature or something like that. There is nothing as universal human nature. So even he limited himself to the self only. So the self should be someone who should constantly create himself, who should transfigure himself constantly. There is nothing as like the nature of the self. So that is something enlightenment even for Baudelaire. So accordingly, whoever understands that he considered to be the enlightened self.
Creation of the self.
Yes, creation of the self, constant creation of the self. Thank you everyone. Thank you sir for your suggestion.
Can you please And I am next year, our topic is the aesthetic art of France, Kafka's in the penal colony, that is by Pandoibi. Yeah. The aesthetic art of France, Kafka's in the penal colony.
So, good afternoon everyone. My name is Kanti from Research Scholar from Bahar University. So, the title of my paper is The Aesthetic Art of Franz Kafka in the Penal Colony. So, Franz Kafka in the penal colony is often read as a disturbing critique of cruelty and colonial violence. The story sustains a reflection on aesthetic as a mode of legitimizing power. The story isn't just depicting violence but analyzing how violence actually becomes acceptable and admirable when it is organized and rendered aesthetically coherent. At the center of the narrative stands the execution apparatus, a machine whose precision and elegance transfer punishment into a spectacle of order. So this paper argues that in the penal colony unfolds an aesthetic art, a movement from the appearance of perfect juridical order to its catastrophic breakdown, through which Kafka shows the emptiness of law when it relies solely on the aesthetic form. So the story stages law's effort to ground its authority, only to reveal that such grounding collapses once the system turns upon itself. By tracing this arc, the paper demonstrates how Kafka anticipates modern philosophical concerns about aestheticization of power, the reduction of human life to a surface of inscription, the dangerous substitution of ethical judgment without procedural beauty. So before going further into it, let us now see what the story is about. So the story in the penal colony is set in an unnamed remote colonial outpost where an elaborate execution machine is used to punish the condemned prisoners. An explorer visiting the colony is introduced to the apparatus by an officer who passionately explains its operation. The machine inscribes the condemned person's sentence onto their body over the course of 12 hours, during which the individual allegedly comes to understand the justice of the punishment before dying. Crucially, the condemned is never informed of either the charge or the sentence beforehand. Understanding is meant to arrive only through physical suffering. The officer reveres the machine as the pinnacle of justice, even as the new commandant of the colony has grown skeptical of the practice. When the explorer refused to endorse the execution method, the officer, seeing the collapse of the old order, voluntarily subjects himself to the machine. However, the apparatus malfunctions, killing him quickly and without producing the revelatory inscription it promises. The story ends with the explorer leaving the colony while the system quietly dissolves. At the heart of in the penal colony lies the fact that law seeks legitimacy through procedure rather than justice. The officer never attempts to justify the punishment ethically. There is no discussion of guilt of the condemned or any sort of moral responsibility. Instead, legitimacy is derived from the flawless execution of the process itself. The machine is treated as self-evidently just because it operates with precision and ritualized regularity. Kafka in this story presents law as a self-referential system, one that no longer needs justification from outside itself. The sentence is valid because it is inscribed, the punishment is just because it follows the prescribed procedure. This shows a modern juridical logic in which legality replaces modernity and correctness of form substitute for ethical reflection. The condemned's ignorance is not a flaw in the system but one of its conditions. Thus, the understanding is unnecessary because the laws of authority is presumed absolute. What makes this justification especially formidable is its aesthetic dimension. The apparatus is described in loving detail. Its gears, needles, calibrated movement is inviting admiration and never the horror. The officer's language changes the machine into a work of art. Here, the beauty lies in its efficiency and symmetry. Law in this context becomes aesthetically persuasive. That is to say, it feels right because it looks ordered. So the aesthetic beauty and the ethical horror are not opposites here, but it's coexisting seamlessly. The execution machine is horrifying in its function, yet it is so beautiful in its form. Pain is not chaotic here or excessive in that manner, but is measured, rejoiced, controlled, and looks meaningful within the system's logic. This aesthetic framing neutralizes ethical shock. Violence hence turns tolerable because it is organized and unquestioned. This is not beauty as we understand it, but a distinctly modern aesthetic, the beauty of systems, mechanisms, and institutions' flawless operations. Kafka anticipates a world in which institutions justify themselves by functioning smoothly than by being just. The more perfectly the system operates, the less it appears open to moral critique. So the machine's method of punishment, that is writing the law onto the body, instigates a reflection on knowledge and meaning. In traditional conception, the law communicates through the medium of language. It is also explained and interpreted. In here, a subject is informed of the charge. They are given reasons for the matter and thereby is expected to understand the rule in order to obey. However, in Kafka's penal colony, knowledge is produced through pain. The condemned learns the law by going through the procedure. This actualizes the human body into a surface of legibility, which is reducing subjectivity to mere material. The condemned here does not speak, neither does he question or resist. He is just written upon. Kafka thus narrates a vision of law in which meaning comes out only at the threshold of bodily distinction. Such a vision resonates with modern philosophical critique of power, where knowledge is disciplinary. The body becomes a site where authority inscribes itself more clearly by passing consciousness altogether. So moving on, the aesthetic arc of the story reaches its decisive moment when the officer places himself under the machine. There is act is crucial because it turns the system inward. So for the first time, the apparatus must justify itself without an external victim. It is here that the aesthetic coherence collapses. The machine malfunctions. It no longer inscribes the sentence properly. It is no longer producing revelation. That occurs without any meaning, without order. The very qualities that once made the apparatus admirable is now, that is, precision and control, disintegrates. So this failure reveals the fragile aspect of aestheticized law. The system works only as long as belief in its form remains intact. This breakdown displays that there was never a deeper truth behind the procedure. The promise of enlightenment through suffering was an illusion sustained by ritual and repetition. Once the form fails, nothing remains except violence. So the significance of in the penal colony extends far beyond its fictional settings. So Kafka's anticipation of modern institutions, be it bureaucracies or like the legal systems, justify their actions through efficiency. It shows transparency and procedural correctness. In such system, harm is often obscured by form. This decision that are taken appear neutral because they follow rules. Violence appears to be necessary because it is systematized. The narration the above warns that when law relies on procedure, it risks losing its ethical grounding altogether. The aesthetic satisfaction of order can dull moral sensitivity. This insight is especially relevant in contemporary context when automated system, administrative governance, technological decision-making, all kinds of system increasingly replaces human judgments. So in a world governed by a system, individual risk become interchangeable components, valued only for their legibility within the structure. Kafka's fiction in different form and manner shows how easily these systems present themselves as rational and human while simultaneously producing suffering. So the question might come that why such violent and war stories read in an aesthetic light? So the calling of In the Penal Colony and aesthetic art, it is emphasizing that the story is structured around the rise and the fall of aesthetic coherence. The narrative begins with admiration of the form, the apparatus, the clarity of the idea provided by the apparatus, and the precision. Then afterwards, it then exposes the ethical cost of the admiration and finally turns towards its collapse. That is, the apparatus disintegrates, it malfunctions. So the art moves from order to failure of the order. Thus, In the Penal Colony, convey that the beauty when detached from ethics becomes complicit in violence. The breakdown of the machine marks a moment when order can no longer sustain meaning. So to conclude, this exploration of In the Penal Colony of how law seeks legitimacy through aesthetic form is by first presenting punishment to be something lawful and beautiful. It shows how violence can be normalized and hence justified. So the story's aesthetic arc is from admiration to collapse, which unveils the downfall of the system, the emptiness of it, replacing ethical judgments with procedural perfection. So in tracing this arc, the story awaits some key concerns, that the aestheticization of power, the reduction of human life to just the surface of inscription, the absurdity and the cruelty of blind legal formalism and dangerous system that functions without moral reflection. What remains for us is not the order, but the silent suffering of the masses, a warning that still reverberates in the modern world. Thank you.
The time to discussion. Yeah.
थोड़ा जल्दी हो गया धीरे-धीरे हाँ टायर्ड हो गया you mentioned that if instead of the law being backed by a moral framework, if it is backed by an aesthetic framework, then once the belief in the aesthetic value goes away, then what is left is sheer violence. Now, can one not make a similar claim about any kind of system? For example, if the belief in the morality of a particular act goes away, then again we do not really have a justification. There does not seem to be something unique about an aesthetic justification of law or aestheticization of law. It seems even if you ground legal systems in some kind of moral principles, and if people stop believing in those moral principles, then again law would lose its meaning. So what's unique about, what's different about grounding law or legal frameworks, which are different of course, in aesthetic judgment as opposed to in ethical judgments? If people don't believe in, of course, the underlying ethical principles, they don't need to follow the law. Right? Again, you have arbitrary violence and whatnot. What's different in this?
Sir, here I'm like framing the stories the story that is talking about officer, which is like reviewing the apparatus that aesthetically, like without any moral background or the moral, like it is aesthetically visualized, understood, and everything without any moral framework from behind. So that way, like it malfunctions. So it does not necessarily mean like other like moral thing. It cannot. It doesn't mean that a law cannot have aesthetics.
No, that's not the concern. The concern, you seem to be suggesting that because in this particular case, inequality, law is based on the perfection of this movement of different parts, and once that goes away, this belief in the law itself goes away. And if you look, for example, 50, 60 years back, for example, in Dostoevsky's writing, right, in Most of the Underground, there the society seems to be regulated by strict moral principles. It's not moral in the sense of good or bad in a normative sense, but what people consider good or bad. And when that goes away, over there as well, it is some kind of a breakdown of established social mores. So it does not seem to be a unique point or a point that separates an ethical framework for law versus an aesthetic framework for law. There are, of course, and also like when Kafka is writing, it's good to read it in the context of say the Nazi or the fascist movements, in which you actually have an aestheticization of power. And that's a point well made. It's just this minor thing about that, because there seems to be, it seemed to me that you're making a positive claim that because law is based on the procedural perfection, as it were, once that goes away, the law itself kind of becomes weakened. But that is applicable in all cases.
But then like here I'm like suggesting about the story. Like the story there, like the narrative collapses because there's no morality, there's an ethical background in the aestheticization of that apparatus. So since that collapses, that is why like the entire point of this is gathering.
I would like to intervene here maybe for a minute.
Yeah, please.
The thing is that,
Scholars has to
even before you were born, okay, even before you were born, I think I happened reading Camus and Kafka. So I found at the founding, there was no ethical sense of law and order here because people like Kafka and Camus, okay, they were concerned about the pure existence of the human subject. In the sense that, they were least worried about an ethical sense, okay, or not even an artistic sense. Because you see, the absurd or the concept of absurd lies not in the subject, not in the object, but in between that. In the sense that when the object is contacting the subject, there will be the absurd comes. So absurd is actually the what? It's not absurdity but what? Absurd. Absurd hero. Absurd is actually the hero in that case. Therefore, this is the pure existentialist understanding about, I believe, it is about the Sartrean concept of, being for itself and being itself and being for itself. Being for itself is actually what it is. It has to be defined this way. It is not what it is, but it is what it is not. Negation. The moment, that is to say, the human subject has an inherent capacity to revolt himself. Therefore, Camus talks about revolt and revolution. Revolution, of course, has an objective, whereas revolt doesn't have an objective. Just as Camus says that, 13 years I have been a slave, but 13th year, 13th minute, 13th second, of course, I can say no, not to you, but to myself. That moment, of course, I myself, revolt, and so that I accept, understand, appropriate my identity. Therefore, we should not somehow ascribe certain terms like ethical sense to Kafka, because Kafka is actually a great philosopher whom I rather not appreciate, but I love. So even before you were born, I started reading Viti Ko Ki Baat. I started reading Kafka. Okay, sorry, thank you. This is all for me.
It is very positive opinion, positive way of response to young scholars who are coming to learn philosophy and to work with the philosophy. Yeah, we have to encourage them to read more, to work hard, to search for new knowledge, dimensions of knowledge. Okay, thank you very much. All three of the paper presentation people will made justice to their justice to their presentations. Thank you very much, and congratulations to all of you. And work hard. That is the only advice I can do you. And the certificate is there.
Yeah, certificate is there, definitely.
Thank you so much, Madam, for your the chairperson and presenters. Now, the certificate distribution will be held in this time. Now, may I request Professor Vikram Singh Sirala sir to distribute certificate to the research scholars who have presented their paper. Our team will bring this certificate and to color of now. May I request Dr. Kubita Dului to receive her certificate from our Sirala sir.
अरे इनका फोटो तुम तो फोटो
Vikram sir will distribute the certificate to kind of lab with the printing and stuff. Now, may I request Adreja Sharma to receive her certificate and to kind of lab from our Vikram sir. This is the certificate to Adreja Sharma and to kind of lab along with the certificate. We are encouraging the research scholar. And the last of the list, Panthrevi, research scholar. She will get her certificate from our Sirala sir. And I took enough lab. Just to receive it. Padi sir is earlier ready already.
अब नहीं होगा
आप मैडम से बता दियो ना.